The morning frost clung to the windows like broken promises. Clara Martinez pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching her breath fog the view of fields that once belonged to her grandmother. Her 6-year-old daughter Lila slept peacefully in the room next door, unaware that their world was about to crack open like drought-stricken earth. This is a story about family betrayal that cut deeper than any winter wind, about a community that rose up when blood relations failed, about the quiet strength of a single mother who learned that sometimes the family you choose matters more than the one you're born into. Welcome back. Tell me from which city you are watching me and what time it is there. Now, listen to this story. Clara had inherited more than just the farm from her grandmother, Elena. She'd inherited the weight of expectations, the burden of tradition, and the crushing responsibility of keeping 3 generations of memories alive in soil that seemed to grow more stubborn each year. The mortgage payments arrived like clockwork. The broken tractor needed repairs she couldn't afford, and Lila needed new shoes for school. But Clara Martinez didn't know how to quit. Her calloused hands told stories of pre-dawn milkings and late-night bookkeeping. Her back ached from lifting hay bales meant for stronger arms. Her heart carried the echo of every small-town whisper about the girl who got pregnant too young and lost her husband in a car accident before their daughter could walk. The knock on the door came at 7 in the morning. Clara wiped flour from her apron and opened it to find her cousin Ethan standing on her porch like salvation in a wrinkled suit. His city shoes were polished. His smile was practiced. His eyes held the kind of desperation that comes from having nowhere else to go. "Clara," he said, spreading his arms wide. "Look at you, still fighting the good fight." They hadn't spoken in 3 years. Ethan's presence filled the small kitchen like cologne in a closed space. Too much, too strong, too obvious in its attempt to mask something underneath. He talked about fresh starts and family obligations while Lila peeked around Clara's legs, studying this stranger who claimed to be her cousin. "I lost the job in Chicago," Ethan said, stirring sugar into coffee Clara couldn't afford to waste. "The whole corporate thing wasn't for me anyway. I thought maybe I could help out here, with the farm, with Lila." Clara's grandmother used to say that desperate people make dangerous guests. But winter heating bills don't pay themselves. The roof leak in the barn was getting worse, and Lila asked every night when someone would come help Mommy with the heavy things. "You can stay in the guest room," Clara heard herself saying, "just until you get back on your feet." The words felt like stepping off a cliff. Ethan's smile widened. "You won't regret this, cousin. We're family, right? Family takes care of family." But as Clara watched him unpack his expensive suitcases, she wondered why his definition of family always seemed to involve other people taking care of him. The town of Millbrook had existed for over a century. Its main street stretched 6 blocks between the Methodist church and the grain elevator. Population 843, not counting the Henderson baby who'd arrived last month. Everyone knew everyone's business. Everyone knew everyone's struggles. And everyone understood that in a place like this, your word was your bond, and your neighbors were your lifeline. Mrs. Martha Hargrove had run the town bakery for 37 years. She'd fed 4 generations of Millbrook families, attended more funerals than weddings, and never met a problem that couldn't be improved with fresh bread and honest conversation. Her kitchen was the unofficial town hall. Her opinion carried the weight of earned wisdom. When Ethan walked into Hargrove's bakery that first week, Martha studied him like a recipe that didn't look right. "You must be Clara's cousin," she said, not bothering to hide her assessment. "The one from the city." Ethan's charm offensive began immediately. "Yes, ma'am, beautiful place you have here, real authentic. I've been thinking about writing a book about small-town life, the simplicity, the authentic American experience." Martha's flour-dusted hands paused in their kneading. "Son, we don't call it anything. We just live it." The annual Harvest Festival had been Millbrook's crown jewel for 78 years. 3 days of community celebration that brought together every family within 50 miles. Local bands played on the courthouse steps. Children ran between booths selling funnel cakes and hand-carved toys. Teenagers flirted behind the Methodist church while their parents argued good-naturedly about whose apple pie deserved the blue ribbon. For Clara, the festival had always meant connection, community, home. For Lila, it meant face painting and pony rides and staying up past bedtime to watch fireworks explode over the grain elevator. "Can Cousin Ethan come with us?" Lila asked, tugging on Clara's hand as they approached the festival grounds. Clara looked around for Ethan and found him standing apart from the crowd, scrolling through his phone with the practiced indifference of someone who'd never learned to love a place like this. "He's busy, sweetheart," Clara said, though busy with what, she couldn't say. The festival wrapped around them like a warm quilt. Mrs. Peterson from the hardware store saved them spots at the pie judging. Young Danny Williams helped Lila onto the carnival horse. Old Mr. E. Jen shared stories about the festival's history, while Lila collected painted rocks from the children's craft booth. Clara felt the town's embrace in every interaction. These people had watched her grow up. They'd brought casseroles after her husband's funeral. They'd hired her to cater their church functions when money got tight. They knew her story, her struggles, her dreams for Lila's future. But when she looked for Ethan, he was gone. She found him later at the motel bar outside town, nursing a whiskey and complaining to anyone who'd listen about small-town entertainment and backward thinking. "This place is like stepping back in time," he told a traveling salesman. "No wonder people get stuck here, no vision, no ambition." Clara stood in the doorway, invisible in her simple dress and practical shoes. She thought about her grandmother, who'd chosen this place, her neighbors, who'd built their lives here, her daughter, who ran through these streets like they were made of gold. For the first time since Ethan's arrival, Clara felt the cold weight of a mistake settling in her chest. Spring arrived early that year, but it brought more work than hope. The fields needed plowing. The vegetable garden required tilling. The fence posts rotted over winter needed replacing. Clara's list of necessary tasks grew longer while her bank account grew smaller. Ethan had promised to help with the heavy lifting. Instead, he spent mornings in bed and afternoons in town, charming his way into free meals and friendly conversation, while Clara shouldered work meant for two people. "The farm's not exactly profitable, is it?" Ethan said over breakfast, studying the account books Clara kept meticulously balanced despite their grim conclusions. "It's not about profit," Clara replied, buttering toast for Lila. "It's about legacy, about keeping something alive." Ethan shrugged. "Everything dies eventually, cousin. The smart play is to cash out while you still can." Clara's hand tightened around her coffee mug. "This is Lila's inheritance, her history. History doesn't pay for college." The words hit like a slap. Not because they were cruel, but because they contained just enough truth to hurt. That afternoon, while Clara repaired fence posts alone, Ethan drove her truck to town and didn't return until midnight. He came back smelling like alcohol and expensive perfume, with receipts in his pocket for dinner at the county seat's fanciest restaurant. Dinner paid for with money from Clara's dwindling emergency fund. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday morning in April. Clara had found the bank statements. She'd seen the ATM withdrawals. She'd calculated the money Ethan had burned through in 6 weeks of unemployment. "You took $400, she said, standing in the kitchen doorway while Ethan poured himself coffee like he owned the place. "I borrowed it," he corrected. "I'll pay you back when I find work." "With what job? You haven't applied anywhere. You haven't even looked." Ethan's practiced smile faltered. "I'm exploring opportunities, building connections. These things take time in a place like this." Clara felt something break inside her chest, not her heart. That had been broken before. This was deeper. This was the sound of trust shattering. "You're not exploring anything," she said. "You're hiding, and you're using my daughter's future to pay for it." For a moment, Ethan's mask slipped. Clara saw something ugly underneath, something entitled and angry and completely without shame. "Don't lecture me about responsibility," he snapped. You're the one who got knocked up and trapped herself in this nowhere town. I'm trying to help you see the bigger picture." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a house fire. Clara thought about her grandmother's hands teaching her to knead bread, about her husband's dreams for the farm before the accident, about Lila's laughter echoing through rooms where 4 generations of their family had learned to love this land. "Pack your things," she said quietly. "Be gone by tonight." Ethan laughed. "You can't be serious. We're family, Clara. Blood. Family doesn't steal from family." But when Clara returned from taking Lila to school that afternoon, Ethan was gone. So was her grandmother's jewelry box. So was the emergency cash she kept hidden in the flour canister. So was any remaining faith she'd had in the idea that blood meant anything at all. He'd left behind dirty dishes, unpaid bills, and a note that said simply, "You'll thank me for this someday." The news traveled through Millbrook like ripples on a pond. By evening, half the town knew that Clara's city cousin had vanished like morning mist, taking her grandmother's valuables and her dignity with him. Martha Hargrove heard it from the mail carrier. The mail carrier heard it from Deputy Rodriguez, who'd taken Clara's report about the stolen jewelry. Deputy Rodriguez heard it from Clara herself, who'd stood in the police station trying not to cry while she listed items that couldn't be replaced. Small towns have their own kind of justice. It doesn't happen in courtrooms or council chambers. It happens in living rooms and front porches and coffee shop conversations where reputations are made and unmade with the choosing of careful words. By Thursday, everyone in Millbrook knew that Ethan Martinez was the kind of man who'd eat at your table and steal from your children. By Friday, they'd decided to do something about it. The town meeting wasn't official. Martha Hargrove simply mentioned to a few key people that Clara might need some support. Those people mentioned it to others. Word spread like seeds on fertile ground, until Saturday evening found 24 neighbors gathered in Martha's bakery after closing time. "That girl's been carrying too much weight for too long," Martha said, setting out fresh coffee and yesterday's unsold pastries. "And now that worthless cousin of hers has made things worse." Tom Williams, who owned the hardware store, nodded grimly. "Saw him in here buying expensive tools on Clara's account. Said he was going to fix up the place. Never saw him lift a hammer. He tried to sell me some story about investment opportunities," added Sarah Chen from the post office. "Wanted me to loan him money for some business scheme. Thank goodness I said no." The stories piled up like evidence in a trial. Ethan's charm offensive had backfired spectacularly. Instead of winning allies, he'd revealed his character to people who valued honesty above smooth talk. "What do we do?" asked young Pastor Mitchell from the Lutheran church. Martha's expression was steel wrapped in flour-dusted gentleness. "We do what neighbors do. We help." The plan took shape organically. Tom Williams would organize repair work on Clara's farm. Sarah Chen would spread word through her postal network about Clara's vegetables and eggs. Pastor Mitchell would coordinate childcare so Clara could focus on spring planting. Martha would teach Clara her grandmother's bread recipes, the ones that had made Hargrove's bakery famous throughout the county. But first, they needed to make sure Clara would accept help. Pride runs deep in farming families. It's bred into the bone by generations who survived by depending on themselves and the land. Clara Martinez had inherited that pride along with her grandmother's farm. She'd worn it like armor through her husband's death, through single motherhood, through lean harvests and expensive repairs. Now that armor felt more like a prison. "Mrs. Hargrove," Clara said when Martha appeared at her door Monday morning with fresh cinnamon rolls and a determined expression. "You didn't need to—" "Hush, child," Martha interrupted, stepping into the kitchen like she belonged there. "I came to talk business." Clara poured coffee with hands that shook slightly. The events of the past week had left her raw, exposed. She felt like everyone in town could see her failure written across her face. "I want to teach you Elena's bread recipes," Martha said without preamble. The ones she never wrote down, the ones she learned from her mother. Clara's grandmother had been Martha's closest friend. They'd shared recipes, secrets, grandchildren's first steps. When Elena died, she'd taken decades of baking wisdom to her grave. Why now? Clara asked. Martha's eyes were kind but firm. Because those recipes belong in your family. Because this town needs good bread. And because you need another source of income. The offer was generous beyond measure. Martha's bread recipes were legendary. People drove from 3 counties away to buy her Saturday loaves. She'd never shared her secrets with anyone outside her own family. I can't pay you for lessons, Clara said quietly. Who said anything about paying? Martha replied. I said business. You learn the recipes, you bake the bread, we split the profits. 50-50. The partnership offered more than money. It offered connection to her grandmother's memory. It offered a skill that couldn't be stolen or lost or defaulted on. It offered hope. When do we start? Clara asked. Martha's smile could have powered the grain elevator. Right now if you've got flour. The lessons began that very morning. Martha's hands guided Clara's through the ancient alchemy of flour, water, yeast, and time. These weren't recipes you could learn from books. They lived in muscle memory, in the feel of properly developed gluten, in the sound of dough that had been kneaded just enough. Your grandmother had magic in her hands, Martha said, watching Clara work. Looks like it runs in the family. For the first time in months, Clara felt something besides exhaustion. She felt connected, rooted. Part of something larger than her immediate struggles. But learning to bake was only the beginning. Tom Williams appeared that afternoon with his toolbox and his teenage son, Danny. They'd come to fix the barn door that had been hanging crooked since winter. Behind them came Jim Peterson with lumber. Behind him came half a dozen other men who'd found reasons to stop by Clara's farm on this particular Tuesday. We were thinking about forming a work crew, Tom said, not quite meeting Clara's eyes. Help each other with spring repairs. Start with your place, if that's all right. Clara watched grown men shuffle their feet like schoolboys asking for permission. These were her neighbors, her community, people who'd known her since she was Lila's age. I can't pay, she began. Nobody asked for pay, Jim Peterson interrupted. This is what neighbors do. Have you ever experienced the overwhelming generosity of people who expect nothing in return? Have you felt the weight of community care wrapping around you like a warm blanket on the coldest night? Clara stood in her farmyard watching skilled hands repair years of accumulated damage. She saw her neighbors' children playing with Lila. She heard their wives planning a schedule for shared childcare. She felt the town of Millbrook deciding, without fanfare or announcement, that Clara Martinez and her daughter would not face their struggles alone. For the first time since Ethan's betrayal, Clara Martinez cried. But these were different tears. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of belonging. These were tears that watered hope. The farmers' market opened the first Saturday in May. Clara arrived before dawn with 24 loaves of bread, 3 flats of vegetables, and a stomach full of nervous energy. She'd borrowed Martha's van and her folding table. She'd made signs on poster board with Lila's help. She'd practiced her sales pitch in the mirror until the words sounded natural. But standing in the pre-dawn darkness, setting up her booth between the honey vendor and the flower lady, Clara felt like an imposter. What if no one bought anything? What if her bread wasn't good enough? What if people pitied her more than they supported her? The doubts multiplied like weeds. Then Martha Hargrove arrived with a thermos of coffee and the kind of smile that could chase away any shadow. Nervous? Martha asked. Terrified, Clara admitted. Good. Means you care. Martha helped arrange the bread loaves in Martha's own wicker baskets, each one lined with a clean white cloth. Elena would be proud, you know. Her granddaughter carrying on the tradition. The market came alive as the sun rose. Vendors called greetings to each other. Early customers began browsing before the official opening. Children ran between stalls while their parents examined produce and handmade crafts. Clara's first customer was Mrs. Rodriguez from the pharmacy. Is this Elena's bread? She asked, examining a loaf of sourdough with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Made from her recipe, Clara confirmed, her voice barely steady. Mrs. Rodriguez bought 2 loaves. Then the Methodist minister bought one. Then a couple from the next county over bought 4, saying they'd driven 30 miles specifically for Hargrove's bread, and were thrilled to find it available here. By noon, Clara had sold every loaf. By closing time, she'd taken orders for next week that would require doubling her production. By evening, she'd deposited more money than she'd seen in months. But the real victory wasn't financial. The real victory was watching Lila help customers, seeing her daughter's pride in her mother's work, feeling like she was building something worth passing down. The real victory was belonging. Summer brought heat that pressed down on Millbrook like a heavy blanket. It also brought challenges that tested Clara's newfound stability. The ancient well pump finally gave up, requiring expensive repairs. Lila caught pneumonia and spent a week in the county hospital. The vegetable garden suffered through the worst drought in memory. Any one of these problems would have been manageable. All 3 together felt like the universe testing her resolve. Clara found herself working 18-hour days, baking bread before dawn, tending sick vegetables in the merciless heat. Sitting beside Lila's hospital bed during visiting hours, reading stories and trying not to show her fear. The community rallied again. Pastor Mitchell organized prayer circles. Tom Williams rigged a temporary irrigation system for the garden. Martha managed Clara's market stall when Clara couldn't leave Lila's side. But the strain showed in Clara's face, in her shrinking frame, in the way her hands shook when she thought no one was looking. "You're burning yourself out," Martha said one evening, finding Clara kneading tomorrow's bread despite being on her feet since 4 that morning. "I'm managing," Clara replied, though her voice suggested otherwise. "Managing isn't living." Martha's words hit their target. Clara had been so focused on surviving each day that she'd forgotten to consider whether she was actually thriving. That night, after Lila was finally released from the hospital, Clara sat on her front porch watching fireflies dance over the recovering garden. Her daughter slept peacefully inside. Her bread for tomorrow was rising in the kitchen. Her bills were current for the first time in years. She was managing. But Martha was right. Managing wasn't enough. Clara needed to think bigger, dream bigger, build something that could sustain both her and Lila through whatever challenges the future held. She needed to stop surviving and start living. But some decisions require courage that only comes from desperation. And Clara's test of desperation was about to arrive in a form she'd never expected. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening in August. Clara almost didn't answer. She was exhausted from a day that had begun at 4 a.m. with bread baking and ended at 8 p.m. with evening chores. Lila was finally asleep after a day of recovery from her illness. The last thing Clara wanted was another problem to solve. But the caller ID showed her Aunt Maria's number, Ethan's mother. Clara hadn't spoken to her since the theft. "Clara," Maria's voice was strained. "I need to talk to you about Ethan." Clara's grip tightened on the phone. "If this is about the money he stole, he wants to come back." The words hit Clara like cold water. "What?" "He's been staying with his father in Phoenix. But they didn't work out there either. He says he wants to make things right with you. He says he's changed." Clara sank into her grandmother's rocking chair, the same chair where Elena had taught her to shell peas and braid hair and believe in the goodness of family. "He stole from me, Aunt Maria. He stole from Lila." "I know," Maria's voice was thick with embarrassment. "I offered to pay you back, but he said he wanted to do it himself. He said he had a plan." Clara closed her eyes. The last time Ethan had a plan, she'd lost her grandmother's jewelry and her faith in blood relations. "He's family, Clara. Whatever he did, whatever mistakes he made, he's still family." The word sat between them like a loaded gun. Family. It was supposed to mean everything. It was supposed to matter above all else. But Clara had learned that family could betray you, community could save you, and sometimes the people who shared your blood were the ones who hurt you most. "Tell him no," Clara said. "Just think about it," Maria pleaded. "He's my son. You're like a daughter to me. Don't let his mistakes destroy our whole family." After Maria hung up, Clara sat in the growing darkness, listening to the sounds of summer night settling around her grandmother's farmhouse. Crickets sang in the garden. An owl called from the oak tree, where her grandfather had hung a swing for her mother 40 years ago. The old house settled into its foundation, with the satisfied groans of lumber that had weathered decades of seasons. This place held 4 generations of her family's stories, but it also held her future, Lila's future. And Clara was finally learning the difference between family that demanded loyalty and family that earned it. The answer was still no. But life rarely accepts our first answer. Ethan returned to Millbrook on a Thursday morning in September, driving a rental car he couldn't afford and carrying promises he'd never kept before. He didn't come to Clara's farm. Instead, he went directly to Martha Hargrove's bakery, ordering coffee and charm in equal measure. "I hear Clara's doing well," he said, leaning against the counter like he belonged there. "I'm proud of her, really proud." Martha studied him with eyes that had measured men for 37 years. "Proud enough to pay back what you stole?" Ethan's smile never wavered. "That's exactly why I'm here. I've got a business opportunity that could solve all our problems." The bakery fell silent. Even the coffee maker seemed to pause in its gurgling. Other customers stopped their conversations to listen. In a town like Millbrook, everyone's business was everyone's concern. "What kind of business?" Martha asked. Ethan pulled out a folder thick with papers and dreams. "Development. Company from Chicago wants to buy farmland for a resort project. Luxury cabins, golf course, conference center. They're offering 3 times market value for the right properties." Martha's expression could have curdled milk. "And let me guess, Clara's farm is one of the right properties." "It's perfect for them. Close to town but private, good water rights, and Clara needs the money." The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Then Martha spoke with the kind of quiet authority that came from being the unofficial mayor of Millbrook's moral landscape. "Son, I think you better leave." But Ethan wasn't finished. "I'm not the bad guy here, Mrs. Hargrove. I'm trying to help Clara see the bigger picture. This farm is bleeding money. She's killing herself trying to keep it alive. This development could set her and Lila up for life." "Get out," Martha said. It wasn't a request. Ethan left, but not before half the town had heard his pitch. Not before the seed of his idea had been planted in soil already fertilized by economic uncertainty and family obligation. Not before Clara heard about it herself. The confrontation happened at sunset on Clara's front porch. She'd been expecting him. The town's gossip network had given her 3 hours of warning, 3 hours to prepare arguments and defenses, and the kind of anger that burns slow and steady. "You look good," Ethan said, climbing the porch steps like he'd been invited. "Healthy, strong, different." Clara didn't move from her rocking chair. "What do you want?" "To apologize, to make things right." He held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I know I messed up before. I know I let you down, but I've got a chance to fix everything. By selling my farm to developers?" Ethan's practiced expression flickered. "You heard about that. This is Millbrook, Ethan." "I hear about everything." He sat down on the porch steps without permission, making himself at home in the space between Clara and her front door. "Just listen to the numbers, okay? They're offering enough money to pay off the mortgage, set up college funds for Lila, buy a house in town. You could open a real bakery with Martha. You could have a life that doesn't require 18-hour days." Clara rocked slowly, considering words that sounded reasonable and felt like poison. "This land has been in our family for 4 generations, she said. "And it's been losing money for 4 generations. Elena was too sentimental to see it. Your parents were too stubborn. Don't make the same mistake." The words hit their intended target. Clara felt the familiar weight of financial pressure, the exhaustion of working multiple jobs, the fear of what would happen to Lila if Clara got sick or hurt. "I've changed, Clara. I mean it this time. Let me help you make the smart choice." Clara studied her cousin in the fading light. He looked older than his 35 years. His expensive clothes couldn't hide the desperation in his eyes or the way his hands shook slightly when he thought she wasn't looking. "Why do you care if I sell?" she asked. For the first time, Ethan's mask slipped completely. "Because I need this deal to work. Because I owe money in Chicago. Because if I don't deliver on this project, I'm—" He stopped, catching himself. "You're what?" "In trouble." Real trouble. The truth hung between them like smoke. Ethan hadn't returned to make amends. He hadn't come back because he'd changed or because he cared about Clara's future. He'd come back because he needed something from her. Again. "Get off my land," Clara said quietly. "Clara, please, just think about it. Think about Lila's future." "I am thinking about Lila's future. That's why I'm telling you to leave." Ethan stood slowly, his charm finally exhausted. "You're making a mistake, cousin. This farm is going to bury you, just like it buried Elena. Don't be too proud to save yourself." After he left, Clara sat on the porch until the first stars appeared. She thought about her grandmother's hands in garden soil, about Lila's laughter echoing through rooms where generations of their family had learned to love this land, about the community that had wrapped around them like a shield when they needed it most. Some things couldn't be measured in dollars. Some decisions required choosing between survival and soul. Clara had spent months learning to survive. Now she had to learn to choose. The town meeting was called for Friday night at the community center, official this time, with Mayor Patterson presiding and Deputy Rodriguez taking notes. Word had spread through Millbrook like wildfire about Ethan's development proposal, and people had opinions that needed airing. Clara arrived early, her stomach tight with anxiety. She'd spent 2 days thinking about Ethan's offer, running numbers, imagining different futures for herself and Lila. The financial logic was undeniable. The emotional cost was unmeasurable. The community center filled quickly. Clara recognized every face. These were people who'd bought her bread, helped repair her barn, watched Lila during her hospital stay. These were neighbors who'd become family when blood family had failed her. But tonight, she also heard whispers that chilled her heart. "Maybe she should consider it," someone said behind her. 3 times market value, that's life-changing money. "Elena would roll over in her grave," someone else replied. "Elena's not the one struggling to pay bills." Mayor Patterson called the meeting to order, but it was Martha Hargrove who stood to address the crowd. "We're here because one of our neighbors is facing a difficult decision," Martha began. "Clara Martinez has been offered money to sell her family's farm to developers. Big money. More money than most of us will see in a lifetime." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clara felt every eye in the room studying her, measuring her, judging her choices before she'd made them. But before we discuss Clara's decision, we need to discuss something else. We need to talk about what kind of community we want to be. Martha's words carried the weight of earned authority. "I've lived in this town for 63 years. I've seen families come and go. I've seen farmland sold and subdivided. I've seen what happens when money becomes more important than memory." She turned to look directly at Clara. "Child, whatever you decide, this community will support you, but I want everyone in this room to understand what we're talking about losing." What followed was a catalog of memory and meaning that stretched back generations. Tom Williams talked about buying his first tools from Elena Martinez and learning carpentry skills in her barn. Pastor Mitchell described the fundraisers Elena had organized to build the church playground. Sarah Chen remembered Elena's victory garden that fed half the town during the recession of the 80s. But it was young Danny Williams, Tom's teenage son, who spoke the words that changed everything. "My great-grandfather built the fence posts on that farm," he said, his voice cracking with adolescent passion. "My grandfather repaired them. My dad maintains them. If that farm gets developed, what's left of our history? What do I tell my kids about the work our family did?" The room fell silent. Clara felt the weight of 4 generations settling on her shoulders. Not just her family's generations, but the community's. all the hands that had worked her land, all the connections that had grown from shared labor and mutual dependence. Ethan stood up from the back of the room. "With all due respect to your history," he said, his voice carrying the practiced condescension of someone who'd never understood the difference between price and value. "History doesn't pay for college tuition. History doesn't cover medical bills. Clara's got to think about reality, not sentiment." Martha Hargrove's eyes could have cut glass. "Son, you're talking to people who've been living reality a lot longer than you've been running from it." The words hit their target. Ethan's face reddened, but he pressed on. "Look, I get it. Change is hard. But this development could bring jobs to Millbrook, tourism, economic growth. Sometimes you have to sacrifice the past to build the future." "Whose future?" asked Jim Peterson. "Yours? Or the people who actually live here?" The question hung in the air like morning fog. Everyone in that room knew Ethan's history with Clara, knew about the stolen jewelry and disappeared money, knew about promises made and broken. Clara stood slowly. The room fell silent. "I appreciate everyone's concern," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. "I appreciate the support this community has shown me and Lila. You've all given us more than we ever expected or deserved." She paused, looking at faces that had become dear to her. "But this decision is mine to make, and I've made it." The pause stretched until it became almost unbearable. "I'm keeping the farm. If this story is moving you, don't forget to like and subscribe, because your support allows us to keep sharing stories like this." The relief in the room was almost tangible. Clara heard Martha Hargrove whisper, "Thank God," and saw Tom Williams nod with satisfaction. But she also saw the disappointment in a few faces, people who genuinely believed the development money could have changed her life for the better. Ethan's reaction was volcanic. "You're making a huge mistake," he said, his voice rising. "This is pride talking, not sense. You're going to regret this decision for the rest of your life." "Maybe," Clara replied, "but it'll be my life to regret." "What about Lila? What about her future?" Clara felt the heat rise in her chest. This man who'd stolen from a child was now claiming to care about that child's welfare. "Lila's future is growing up to understand that some things can't be bought or sold," Clara said. "Some things are worth more than money. Some things are worth keeping even when keeping them is hard." Ethan shook his head in disgust. "You people are all the same, stuck in the past, afraid of change. No wonder this town is dying." The words were designed to hurt, and they found their mark. Millbrook was struggling. Young people left for opportunities in bigger cities. Main Street had empty storefronts. The population had shrunk by 30% over the past decade. But Martha Hargrove had lived through worse times than these, and she had words for men who confused stagnation with tradition. "Son," she said, standing to face Ethan across the crowded room, "a town dies when its people stop believing in each other, when they start thinking money matters more than community, when they let outsiders tell them their history isn't worth preserving." She paused, letting her words settle. Clara's keeping that farm isn't about being stuck in the past. It's about believing in the future. Her future, Lila's future, this town's future. The applause started slowly. One pair of hands in the back of the room. Then another. Then the entire community center erupted in sound that spoke louder than any speech about what Millbrook valued and whom they supported. Ethan left without another word. Clara stayed until the last neighbor had shaken her hand, and the community center was empty except for memories and the echo of collective decision. She'd chosen her path, the hard path, the uncertain path, the path that led through exhaustion and financial struggle toward something that couldn't be measured in bank statements. She'd chosen home. October brought the kind of weather that makes you believe in seasons, cool mornings that required sweaters, afternoons warm enough for short sleeves, evenings perfect for sitting on front porches and watching the world prepare for winter. It also brought unexpected consequences of Clara's decision to keep the farm. The development company didn't give up easily. They sent representatives to town, offering alternative sites, increased purchase prices, economic impact studies that promised hundreds of jobs and millions in tax revenue. They held their own meetings, bought ads in the county newspaper, and made their case to anyone who would listen. Some people in Millbrook began to waver. The promise of economic revival was seductive, especially for families struggling with declining farm prices and young people leaving for better opportunities elsewhere. Clara found herself at the center of a community debate that grew more heated with each passing week. She heard whispers at the grocery store about selfishness and missed opportunities. She saw neighbors avoid eye contact at church. She felt the weight of carrying other people's dreams and disappointments along with her own. But she also discovered allies in unexpected places. Danny Williams organized a group of teenagers to help with Clara's fall harvest, working for nothing more than experience and the chance to be part of something meaningful. Pastor Mitchell started a community garden project on Clara's land, giving families space to grow their own food and teaching children about agriculture. Martha Hargrove expanded their bread-making partnership, using Clara's farm as a supplier for herbs and vegetables that made their products unique throughout the county. Most surprisingly, Clara discovered that saying no to the developers had given her a voice she'd never known she possessed. Local newspapers wanted to interview the single mother who'd turned down millions to preserve family land. Agricultural organizations invited her to speak about sustainable farming practices. The state university asked her to participate in a study about women in agriculture. For the first time in her life, people outside Millbrook were listening to Clara Martinez. But the most important voice belonged to Lila, who'd spent the autumn helping with the harvest and learning lessons that no amount of development money could have bought. "Mama," Lila said one evening as they collected eggs from the chicken coop, "why did Cousin Ethan want us to sell our home?" Clara paused in her work, considering how to explain adult complexities to a 6-year-old heart. "He thought money was more important than other things," she said finally. "What other things?" Clara looked around the farmyard where her daughter was learning to love the land that had shaped 4 generations of their family. She saw the vegetable garden where Lila had planted her first seeds, the old oak tree where future grandchildren might swing, the barn where teenagers were learning the value of hard work. "Belonging," Clara said, "knowing where you come from, having a place that's yours no matter what happens in the world." Lila nodded with the serious wisdom of childhood. "I like belonging here." That night, Clara sat at her grandmother's kitchen table writing letters. Letters to the development company, formally declining their offer. Letters to agricultural publications, sharing her story of choosing heritage over profit. Letters to universities, accepting invitations to speak about the value of preserving family farms. But the most important letter was one she never sent. It was addressed to Ethan, though she had no idea where he'd gone after leaving Millbrook. "Dear cousin," she wrote, "I want you to know that I don't hate you for what you did. I understand now that you were afraid, desperate, looking for solutions to problems that seemed bigger than anything you could handle alone." She paused, thinking about forgiveness and family, and the difference between understanding someone's choices and accepting them. "But I also want you to know that fear doesn't justify stealing from people who love you. Desperation doesn't excuse betraying trust, and family means more than blood. It means showing up. It means keeping promises. It means carrying your share of the weight." She wrote about the community that had surrounded her when family had failed, about neighbors who'd become the family she'd chosen, about learning that some bonds are stronger than genetics, and some loyalties have to be earned rather than inherited. "I hope you find your way," she concluded. "I hope you learn the difference between taking and earning. I hope you discover that the best things in life can't be bought or sold or stolen." She signed the letter and filed it away with other documents she'd never send but needed to write. Sometimes the most important conversations happen with ourselves. December arrived with the kind of snow that transforms ordinary landscapes into Christmas card scenes. Millbrook looked like a painting, all white fences and red barns and smoke rising from chimneys into air so cold it burned your lungs. Clara's first winter as a successful baker brought challenges she hadn't anticipated. Holiday orders for bread stretched her capacity to its limits. The old farmhouse's kitchen wasn't designed for commercial baking, and Clara found herself working around the clock to meet demand, while still maintaining the farm and caring for Lila. But these were good problems. Problems that came from success rather than failure. Problems that meant she was building something sustainable rather than just surviving day to day. The Christmas market was the biggest event of Millbrook's winter season. Vendors from throughout the county gathered in the community center to sell handmade gifts, homemade treats, and holiday decorations that reflected the rural artistry passed down through generations. Clara's booth overflowed with fresh bread, holiday cookies, and jam made from fruit grown on her own land. She'd also added something new, small bags of Elena's seed collection, saved from her grandmother's garden and carefully preserved for future planting. "History you can grow," read the hand-lettered signs Lila had helped create. The seeds sold as fast as Clara could bag them. People wanted connection to the past, wanted to plant gardens that linked them to Elena Martinez's legendary green thumb. They wanted to be part of preserving something precious, rather than letting it disappear. But Clara's biggest surprise came from an unexpected visitor. Maria, Ethan's mother, appeared at Clara's booth on Saturday afternoon, looking older than her 60 years, and carrying the weight of maternal disappointment like a physical burden. "Clara," she said, her voice barely audible above the market's cheerful noise, "I need to talk to you." They stepped outside into cold air that made their breath visible. Clara waited, unsure whether this conversation would bring apology or accusation. "Ethan's in trouble," Maria said without preamble. "Real trouble. The people he owes money to aren't the patient kind." Clara felt the familiar tug of family obligation, the genetic programming that said blood relations deserved help regardless of their choices. "What do you want me to do?" Clara asked. "Nothing," Maria said, surprising them both. "I want you to do nothing. I wanted you to know so you wouldn't be shocked if something happens to him. But I'm not asking you to help." The words carried the weight of maternal resignation. "I spent 35 years making excuses for my son, bailing him out of trouble, believing his promises to change. I enabled him to become the man who stole from you and Lila." Maria's eyes filled with tears that hadn't yet frozen in the winter air. "He called me last week, wanted me to convince you to reconsider the development deal. Said it was the only way to save him from the mess he'd made." "What did you tell him?" "I told him he'd already taken enough from you. I told him to find another way to solve his own problems." Maria's voice cracked. "I told him I was proud of you for keeping the farm and ashamed of him for trying to sell it." They stood in silence, two women connected by shared disappointment in a man who'd chosen selfishness over family. "I'm sorry," Maria said finally. "For what he did. For what he put you through. For not raising him better." Clara felt something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Maria had been another victim of Ethan's choices, another person whose love had been exploited and trust betrayed. "You're not responsible for his decisions," Clara said. "He made his choices. He'll have to live with the consequences." Maria nodded, wiping her eyes with gloves that had seen too many winters. "The farm looks good. Elena would be proud." After Maria left, Clara returned to her market booth with a heart that felt simultaneously heavier and lighter. Heavier because family disappointment never fully heals. Lighter because she'd finally gotten the apology she needed to hear and the permission to stop carrying guilt that had never belonged to her. The holiday market closed with record sales and community satisfaction that would fuel conversations until spring. Clara packed her unsold items and counted money that would pay for Lila's Christmas presents, winter heating bills, and January seed orders. But the real gift was watching Lila help elderly customers, seeing her daughter's comfort with the community that had embraced them both, witnessing the next generation learning lessons about belonging and contribution that no amount of development money could have purchased. Spring returned to Millbrook with the kind of dramatic flair that makes you believe in rebirth. One day the ground was frozen solid, The next day it was soft with promise and spotted with the green tips of emerging growth. Clara stood in her grandmother's garden, holding packets of seeds she'd saved from Elena's original stock. Some of these varieties had been grown by her family for 4 generations. Others came from neighbors who'd shared their own saved seeds over decades of mutual gardening support. Lila knelt beside her mother, 7 years old now, and tall enough to handle real garden tools. Together they planted rows that would feed their family and their community, continuing a tradition that stretched back longer than Clara's memory could reach. "Tell me about great-grandmother Elena again," Lila said, patting soil around bean seeds with the seriousness of someone performing important work. Clara smiled, settling into a story she'd told dozens of times, but never tired of sharing. She came to this farm when she was 19 years old, about to marry your great-grandfather Roberto. The land was rough then, mostly pasture and scrub brush. But Elena saw potential. What kind of potential? She saw soil that could feed a family. Space for children to run and play. Room for a garden that could feed the neighborhood during hard times. Clara pointed toward the old oak tree. She planted that tree the first year she lived here. She used to say it would shade her grandchildren's grandchildren. Lila looked up at the massive oak, its branches just beginning to show the pale green of new leaves. "It shades me." "Yes, it does, and someday it'll shade your children too." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of cars pulling into the farmyard. Clara looked up to see a small convoy of vehicles, including Martha's van and Tom Williams' pickup truck. "Surprise!" Martha called out, emerging from her van with what appeared to be the entire town following behind her. The crowd included neighbors Clara recognized, and several faces she didn't. They carried tools, lumber, and the kind of organized enthusiasm that meant someone had been planning this gathering for weeks. "What's going on?" Clara asked, dusting soil from her hands. Tom Williams stepped forward with a grin that suggested mischief of the best kind. "We've been talking. Your baking business has outgrown that farmhouse kitchen. You need proper space if you're going to keep up with demand. We're building you a bakery," Martha added. "Real bakery. Commercial ovens, proper workspace, everything you need." Clara stared at the collection of friends and neighbors who'd apparently decided to spend their Saturday building her dreams. "I can't afford—" "Nobody asked you to afford anything," interrupted Jim Peterson. "This is community investment. We all benefit when local businesses succeed." What followed was the kind of old-fashioned barn-raising that Clara had only heard about in stories. Skilled hands worked with practiced efficiency. The foundation had been poured the previous week, apparently, during secret meetings Clara hadn't been invited to attend. The frame went up with remarkable speed. By evening, the basic structure of a small but complete commercial bakery stood where Clara's empty lot had been that morning. "It'll take a few more weekends to finish," Tom explained as the sun set over their handiwork. "Electrical, plumbing, interior work. But you should be baking in your own shop by summer." Clara walked through the framed building, trying to imagine rolling out dough where now there was only sawdust and possibility. The space was perfectly proportioned for her needs, large enough for growth but small enough to feel manageable. "Why?" she asked Martha, as the crowd began packing up tools and talking about next weekend's work schedule. Martha's answer was simple and complete. "Because you chose us. When you had the chance to take easy money and leave, you chose to stay. You chose to be part of this community's future." That night, Clara sat on her front porch with Lila asleep inside, and the sounds of spring peepers singing from the pond behind the barn. The framed shell of her future bakery stood silhouetted against stars that had watched 4 generations of her family work this land. She thought about the choices that had brought her to this moment, choosing to trust Ethan despite her instincts, choosing to ask for help when pride made it difficult. Choosing to stay when leaving would have been more profitable, choosing community over individual gain. Each choice had felt enormous when she was making it. Now she could see how they'd built upon each other, creating a path she couldn't have imagined when she'd started walking it. Her phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the name made her heart skip. "This is Ethan. Please don't delete this. I need to tell you something." Clara stared at the screen for a long moment, then opened the full message. "I saw the article about you in the Agricultural Journal, read about the bakery project and the community support. I want you to know that I understand now why you kept the farm. I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built, even though I tried to tear it down." The message continued. "I'm in rehab, not just for drinking, though that was part of it. For the thinking that made me believe I deserved other people's success without putting in the work. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm finally trying to change for real this time." Clara read the message twice, then set the phone aside without responding. Some conversations required more thought than immediate reaction could provide. She looked again at the bakery frame, at the garden where Elena's seeds were beginning their journey toward harvest, at the oak tree that had sheltered 4 generations of dreams. Tomorrow she would decide whether to respond to Ethan's message. Tomorrow she would continue the work of building a life that balanced forgiveness with boundaries, community with independence, tradition with progress. Tonight she would sit in the darkness, listening to spring arrive and feeling grateful for the long, difficult journey that had brought her home to herself. Summer arrived early and stayed late, bringing with it the kind of abundant growing season that made farmers believe in providence and gardeners feel like magicians. Clara's vegetables flourished. Her bread business expanded beyond anything she'd imagined possible. The new bakery neared completion just as demand reached levels that made the old farmhouse kitchen completely inadequate. But the real transformation was in Clara herself. The woman who'd spent years working in isolation now found herself at the center of Millbrook's social and economic revival. Her bakery had become the anchor for what people were calling the agricultural renaissance. Other small businesses were opening. Young families were choosing to stay rather than move to bigger cities. Property values were rising as people discovered the appeal of authentic rural community. Clara had become, almost accidentally, a community leader. The responsibility felt both natural and terrifying. People asked her opinion about zoning changes, business development, preservation of farmland. She found herself speaking at county meetings, agricultural conferences, and university symposiums about sustainable rural development. "I never planned to be a spokesperson for anything," she told Martha one evening as they worked together in the nearly completed bakery. "Nobody plans to be a leader," Martha replied, kneading dough with the rhythm of decades. "Leadership finds you when you're ready for it." Clara tested the temperature of the new professional ovens, marveling at the precision and capacity that would allow her to meet orders she'd been turning away for months. "I'm scared I'll make the wrong choices," Clara admitted. "People are counting on me to know things I'm still figuring out myself." Martha paused in her work. Elena felt the same way when she started the community garden during the recession. Tom Williams felt it when he took over the hardware store from his father. Every generation has people who step up when their community needs them. Right now, that's you. The conversation was interrupted by Lila bursting through the bakery door with the urgent energy of an 8-year-old carrying important news. "Mama, there's a man here asking about Cousin Ethan. He says he needs to talk to you about money." Clara's heart sank. She'd been expecting something like this ever since Ethan's text message from rehab. Problems from his past life were bound to surface eventually. The man waiting in Clara's farmyard wore an expensive suit that looked out of place against the rural backdrop. His demeanor was polite but serious, and his business card identified him as a lawyer from Chicago. "Ms. Martinez," he said, extending his hand. "I represent several creditors who have claims against your cousin Ethan Martinez. I understand he stayed with you earlier this year." Clara felt the familiar weight of other people's expectations settling on her shoulders. "He's not here." "I haven't seen him in months." "I know. We've located him in a treatment facility in Arizona, but during our investigation we discovered that he used your farm as collateral for several loans without your knowledge or consent." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. What does that mean? The lawyer's expression was genuinely sympathetic. It means he forged documents claiming to have interest in this property. He used fraudulent paperwork to secure loans he couldn't repay. The good news is that the documentation is clearly fake. The bad news is that untangling the legal mess will take time and money. Clara sank onto her porch steps, feeling like the ground beneath her feet had suddenly become quicksand. Just when life had begun to stabilize, just when the future had started looking bright, Ethan's past had reached out to grab her again. "What do I need to do?" she asked. "Fight it. Prove that the documents are fraudulent. Establish that you never gave permission for your property to be used as collateral." The lawyer handed her a folder thick with papers. "I represent his creditors, but I also know fraud when I see it. You have a strong case, but you'll need your own attorney, and the process could take months." After the lawyer left, Clara sat alone on her porch holding documents that threatened everything she'd built. Legal fees she couldn't afford. Court appearances she couldn't schedule around harvest season. Stress that would impact her business, her parenting, her health. But as the initial shock wore off, Clara felt something else rising in her chest. Not fear, not resignation. Anger. Pure, clean, righteous anger at a man who apparently couldn't stop hurting her even from hundreds of miles away. Martha found her there an hour later, still holding the legal papers and wearing an expression that could have melted steel. "What's wrong?" Martha asked, settling beside Clara on the porch steps with the kind of presence that invited confession. Clara explained about the fraudulent loans, the legal battles ahead, the threat to everything she'd worked to build. She expected Martha to offer sympathy, advice, maybe practical help with childcare during court appearances. Instead, Martha started laughing. Not cruel laughter, not dismissive laughter. The kind of laughter that comes from recognizing a familiar pattern and knowing how it ends. "Oh, honey," Martha said, wiping tears from her eyes. "That boy has no idea who he's messing with." "What do you mean?" Martha gestured toward the bakery, the thriving garden, the farmyard where Clara had built something worth preserving. "You think this community is going to let some Chicago lawyers take your farm because of your cousin's lies?" As if summoned by Martha's words, Tom Williams's pickup truck pulled into the farmyard. Behind him came Jim Peterson's van. Behind that came a small parade of neighbors who'd apparently received phone calls about Clara's legal troubles. Small towns have their own communication systems, faster and more efficient than any social media network. "We heard," Tom said simply. "What do you need?" What followed was the kind of community mobilization that Clara was learning to expect, but never stopped feeling grateful for. Someone knew a lawyer who specialized in fraud cases. Someone else had experience with similar legal battles. The Methodist Church had a fund for members facing unexpected expenses. The town council had strong opinions about out-of-state creditors trying to claim local property based on fraudulent documents. By the end of the evening, Clara had more support than she knew how to accept gracefully. But the most important moment came when Lila, who'd been listening from the porch swing with the intense attention of a child processing adult problems, finally spoke up. "Are they going to take our home?" she asked. Clara knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes. "Not if I have anything to say about it." What if the bad men win? Clara thought about all the battles she'd fought and won over the past year. The choice to keep the farm, the decision to trust her community, the courage to build something bigger than personal survival. Sometimes, sweetheart, fighting is more important than winning. Sometimes standing up for what's right matters more than whether you succeed. Lila nodded with the solemn understanding that comes from growing up in a household where integrity isn't negotiable. Besides, Clara added, looking around at neighbors who'd become family, I'm not fighting alone. The legal battle stretched through the autumn and into winter, creating a background stress that colored every day with uncertainty. Clara spent mornings baking bread and afternoons on phone calls with lawyers. She spent evenings helping Lila with homework and nights reviewing legal documents that seemed designed to maximize confusion. But something unexpected happened during those months of fighting for the right to keep what was already hers. Clara discovered that adversity had made her stronger rather than weaker. The community support had created bonds deeper than anything she'd experienced during easier times. The legal process, while exhausting, had forced her to become more organized, more strategic, more confident in presenting her case to people who didn't know her story. Most importantly, the threat of losing everything had clarified what truly mattered. The breakthrough came in February, during a deposition where Ethan appeared via video conference from his treatment facility. Clara saw him for the first time in almost a year, and the change was dramatic. He'd lost weight. His eyes were clear but haunted. His usual swagger had been replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. "I never had permission to use Clara's property as collateral," he said when asked directly by her lawyer. "I forged the documents. I lied about having legal interest in the farm. Clara had no knowledge of what I was doing." The admission created a moment of stunned silence in the conference room. Clara felt something release in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying for months. "Why did you do it?" her lawyer asked. Ethan looked directly at the camera, which meant he was looking directly at Clara. "Because I was desperate. Because I thought I deserved help I hadn't earned. Because I didn't understand the difference between family obligation and family exploitation." He paused, gathering courage for words that came slowly. "Clara trusted me when she had every reason not to. She gave me a chance to be part of something good. I destroyed that chance because I was too selfish and too scared to do the work required." After the deposition, Clara's lawyer was confident they'd won. The creditors' cases collapsed when faced with clear evidence of fraud. The legal fees would be substantial but manageable, especially with the community fund contributions and Clara's growing bakery income. But Clara found herself thinking less about legal victory and more about the man she'd seen on that video screen. Ethan had looked genuinely broken, not manipulative, not calculating, just broken. That evening, Clara wrote another letter she wasn't sure she'd send. "Dear Ethan," she began, "I saw you today during the deposition. I heard you tell the truth about what you did. I want you to know that telling the truth matters, even when it comes too late to undo the damage." She wrote about forgiveness being different from forgetting, about the distinction between understanding someone's pain and excusing their choices, about the long process of learning to trust again after betrayal. "I hope your treatment helps you find peace," she concluded. "I hope you learn to build something good instead of taking from other people's work. I hope you discover that the best things in life come from contributing rather than consuming." This time she mailed the letter. Spring arrived with legal battles resolved and Clara's property secure. The bakery was not only successful, but had become a destination that drew customers from throughout the region. Clara had hired 2 part-time employees and was considering expansion plans that would have seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. But the most significant change wasn't in her business or her bank account. It was in her relationship with herself and her place in the community. Clara had become the person others turned to for advice, leadership, and inspiration. She served on the school board, the planning commission, and the Agricultural Development Council. She spoke at conferences about sustainable rural development and the importance of preserving family farms. Most importantly, she'd learned that strength comes not from independence, but from interdependence, from being part of something larger than individual survival. The anniversary of Ethan's return and departure fell on a warm day in May. Clara was working in her garden when she heard a car pull into the farmyard. She looked up expecting a customer or neighbor, and instead saw a familiar figure climbing out of an old Honda Civic. Ethan looked different, older, quieter. His expensive clothes had been replaced with simple jeans and a work shirt. His practiced smile was gone, replaced by an expression of nervous humility. "Hello, Clara," he said, stopping at the garden gate like someone asking permission to enter sacred space. Clara straightened, wiping soil from her hands, feeling her heart beat faster without knowing whether from anger or anxiety or something else entirely. "What are you want?" she asked. "To apologize, in person, and to give you this." He held out an envelope that Clara recognized as her own handwriting, the letter she'd sent him after the deposition. "I've read it probably 50 times, Ethan said. "It's the only thing that helped me understand what I'd done to you, what I'd done to myself." Clara took the envelope but didn't open it. "Why are you here, Ethan? I got out of treatment 3 months ago. I've been working construction in Phoenix, saving money, trying to figure out how to make things right." He gestured toward his car, which Clara now noticed was loaded with boxes and suitcases. "I sold everything I owned that was worth selling. I paid back what I could to the people I owed." He pulled a folding chair from his pocket and handed it to Clara. "I can't repay what I stole from you, but this covers some of it. The jewelry, the cash, the interest on the fraudulent loans." Clara opened the check and stared at an amount that would cover Lila's college fund, and then some. "I don't want your money," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "It's not my money, it's yours. It always was." Ethan's voice cracked slightly. "I spent a year in therapy, learning the difference between making amends and asking for forgiveness. This is amends. I'm not asking you to forgive me or trust me or let me back into your life. I just needed to return what I took." Clara studied her cousin's face, looking for traces of the manipulation she'd learned to expect from him. Instead, she saw exhaustion, genuine remorse, and something that looked like hard-won wisdom. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. "Drive back to Phoenix. Keep working construction. Keep going to meetings. Try to build a life based on earning things instead of taking them." The simplicity of his plan was somehow more convincing than any elaborate promise could have been. "I'm proud of what you've built here," Ethan said, looking around the farmyard at the thriving garden, the successful bakery, the home that radiated stability and hope. "I'm proud of who you've become. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what you were trying to protect." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, two people connected by shared history and separated by profound hurt. "Thank you," Clara said finally, "for telling the truth in the deposition, for making this right as much as you could." Ethan nodded. "Can I ask you something? Are you happy?" The question surprised Clara with its directness and its answer. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I am." "Good," Ethan said, and Clara heard genuine joy in his voice. "That's good." He turned to leave, then paused. "If it's okay, I'd like to send Christmas cards to you and Lila. I know I don't have the right to be part of your lives, but I'd like to. I don't know. Remember, that family can be good for something." Clara felt tears starting and blinked them back. "We'd like that." After Ethan left, Clara sat in her garden holding a check that represented not just returned money, but returned dignity. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, about the community that had sustained her through the worst of it, about the daughter who'd learned lessons about resilience and integrity by watching her mother live them. She thought about forgiveness being different from reconciliation, about making peace with people you couldn't trust, about love being stronger than disappointment but boundaries being stronger than love. That evening, Clara and Lila walked through the farm together, inspecting the gardens and checking on the chickens and talking about plans for summer. The bakery hummed with the sound of evening bread production. The farmhouse glowed with warm light from windows that had sheltered 4 generations of dreams. "Mama," Lila said as they stood beneath the oak tree Elena had planted decades earlier, "do you think Cousin Ethan will really be different now?" Clara considered the question seriously. "I think he's trying to be different. Whether he succeeds depends on choices he makes every day." "Will you still be mad at him?" Clara felt the weight of the question settle in her heart. "I'll always be sad about what happened between us. But I'm not angry anymore. Anger is too heavy to carry when you have better things to build." Lila nodded with the wisdom of a child who'd grown up watching adults navigate complicated emotions with grace. "Besides," Clara added, "holding on to anger would have kept me from seeing all the good things that came from the bad things." "What good things?" Clara gestured toward the thriving farmyard, the successful business, the community connections that had grown stronger through adversity. All of this, the bakery, our friends, learning that we're stronger than we thought we were. As summer deepened, Clara's story spread beyond Millbrook's boundaries. Agricultural journals featured articles about her successful integration of traditional farming with modern business practices. Rural development organizations invited her to speak at conferences about community-supported agriculture and the economic potential of preserved farmland. But the recognition that mattered most came from watching Lila grow into a confident, compassionate child who understood both the value of hard work and the importance of asking for help when you needed it. One evening in late August, as Clara was closing the bakery after a particularly busy day, Martha Hargrove appeared with 2 cups of coffee and the kind of expression that suggested serious conversation ahead. "We need to talk," Martha said, settling into a chair with the authority of someone who'd earned the right to speak freely. "About what?" "About your future. About this town's future. About what happens next." Clara poured herself coffee from the pot she kept brewing for late working evenings and waited for Martha to continue. "You know the mayor's planning to retire after this term," Martha said. Clara nodded. Mayor Patterson had been talking about stepping down for months, citing his age and his desire to spend more time with grandchildren. "The town council's been discussing candidates," Martha continued. "Your name keeps coming up." Clara's coffee mug stopped halfway to her lips. "My name for what?" "For mayor, child. Who else?" The suggestion was so unexpected that Clara found herself speechless. She'd never considered running for office, never imagined herself as someone who'd seek political power. "I don't know anything about being mayor," Clara said. "Neither did Patterson when he started. Neither did anyone their first time. But you know about building things. You know about bringing people together. You know about making hard decisions and living with the consequences." Martha listed Clara's qualifications with the authority of someone who'd been making informal assessments of leadership potential for decades. "More importantly, you care about this place. You've proven that by choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier." Clara thought about the past 2 years, about the decisions and challenges that had shaped her into someone she barely recognized from the isolated, struggling woman Ethan had found on her doorstep. "I have a business to run," Clara said. "Lila to raise. I'm not sure I have time to be mayor too." "Nobody has time to be mayor," Martha replied. "That's why it takes someone who believes in something bigger than their own schedule." The conversation continued for another hour, touching on Clara's concerns, the town's needs, and the kind of leadership Millbrook needed to navigate the changes coming as rural America struggled to adapt to economic and social pressures that seemed to intensify each year. By the time Martha left, Clara had agreed to consider the possibility, not to run necessarily, but to seriously consider whether she could serve her community in this new way. That night, Clara sat on her front porch thinking about responsibility and opportunity, and the difference between being chosen for something and choosing it for yourself. The framed shell of a new storage building stood where the old chicken coop used to be. Another expansion project that reflected the growth none of them had expected when they'd started this journey. The phone rang, interrupting her contemplation. The caller ID showed Maria's number. "Clara?" Her aunt's voice was excited in a way Clara hadn't heard in years. "I had to call and tell you. Ethan got a job, a real job, not just construction work. He's going to manage a community garden project in Phoenix. Something about helping people grow their own food in low-income neighborhoods." Clara felt surprised pleasure at the news. "That sounds perfect for him. He said it was your letter that helped him see what kind of work he wanted to do." Something about building instead of taking. They talked for a few more minutes about family news and mutual acquaintances, but the most important part of the conversation was its tone. For the first time since Ethan's betrayal, Clara and Maria were able to talk like family members who cared about each other, despite the pain that had separated them. After Maria hung up, Clara returned to her contemplation of the mayor question. She thought about Elena's legacy, about the oak tree that would shade future generations, about the community that had become her chosen family. She thought about Lila, who was learning lessons about leadership by watching her mother make choices that prioritized community good over individual convenience. By the time she went inside, Clara had made her decision. Fall arrived with the dramatic color display that makes people believe in the possibility of beautiful endings. Clara's campaign for mayor was modest by political standards, but unprecedented for Millbrook. She'd never run for anything before, never made speeches or debated policy positions or asked people to vote for her. But she'd spent 2 years proving that she could bring people together, solve problems, and make decisions that balanced individual needs with community welfare. Her candidacy felt less like a political campaign and more like a natural extension of work she was already doing. Election day fell on the anniversary of the town meeting, where Clara had decided to keep her farm, despite Ethan's pressure to sell. The symmetry wasn't lost on anyone who'd lived through both events. Clara spent election morning baking bread and trying not to think about vote counts. She'd done everything she could to explain her vision for Millbrook's future. Now the decision belonged to her neighbors. The results were announced at 8 o'clock that evening in the community center, where Clara had first stood up to defend her choice to preserve family land over development profits. Clara Rodriguez Martinez, 847 votes. Her opponent, 212 votes. The margin of victory was overwhelming enough to suggest that Clara's neighbors had been waiting for someone exactly like her to offer exactly the kind of leadership they needed. But the moment that mattered most came after the speeches and congratulations, when Lila appeared at Clara's side with the serious expression of a 9-year-old who'd been thinking about important things. "Mama," Lila said, "does being mayor mean you won't have time for the farm anymore?" Clara knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes, aware that every adult in the room was listening to her answer. "It means I'll be taking care of a bigger farm," Clara said. "The whole town is like a farm that needs tending, but our farm, our real farm, will always be home. That won't change." Lila nodded with satisfaction. "Good. I like our home." "So do I, sweetheart. So do I." As Clara looked around the room at friends and neighbors who'd chosen to trust her with their community's future, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The betrayal that had taught her the difference between family by blood and family by choice. The community support that had shown her the power of mutual aid. The personal growth that had transformed her from someone who survived problems to someone who solved them. 6 months later, on a warm day in May, Clara stood at the podium in the same community center, delivering her first State of the Town address as Millbrook's mayor. The agenda was ambitious. New business development that preserved the town's rural character, affordable housing that kept young families from leaving, agricultural initiatives that supported both traditional farming and innovative approaches to sustainable food production. But the most important item wasn't on any official agenda. "Before we get started," Clara said, looking out at faces that had become dear to her over the past 3 years, "I want to tell you about a letter I received this week." She held up an envelope postmarked from Phoenix, Arizona. "It's from my cousin Ethan," Clara continued, and felt the subtle shift in attention that always accompanied mentions of the man who'd tried to sell Clara's farm to developers. "He wanted our community to know that he's been promoted to regional coordinator for urban agriculture projects. He's helping cities throughout the Southwest develop community gardens and food security programs." Clara paused, considering words that had taken weeks to choose carefully. "Ethan asked me to thank Millbrook for the lessons you taught him about the difference between taking from communities and contributing to them. He said watching this town support me when he'd failed me helped him understand what he wanted his work to accomplish." The silence in the room carried complicated emotions. Some people remained skeptical of Ethan's transformation. Others were willing to believe in the possibility of genuine change. Most were simply glad that his story had ended with growth rather than continued destruction. "I'm sharing this," Clara said, "because I think it illustrates something important about the kind of community we are and the kind of community we want to continue being. We hold people accountable for their choices. We support each other through difficulties. And we believe in the possibility that people can change, even when that change comes slowly and at great cost. Have you ever lived through or known someone who went through something similar? Have you seen how communities can rise up to support their members when family systems fail? Have you witnessed the power of people choosing to stay and build rather than leave and start over? Clara finished her address by talking about the future she envisioned for Millbrook, a place where traditional values and innovative approaches could coexist. A community where young people could build lives without sacrificing their connections to the land and culture that had shaped their families for generations. A town that proved rural America could thrive without losing its soul to development pressures or economic forces that prioritized profit over people. After the meeting, Clara walked home through streets she'd traveled all her life, but now saw with different eyes. As mayor, every pothole was her responsibility. Every struggling business was her concern. Every family considering whether to stay or leave was part of her mission. But the weight of leadership felt manageable because it was shared. Tom Williams had been elected to the town council. Martha Hargrove chaired the Economic Development Committee. Pastor Mitchell coordinated community outreach programs. Denny Williams, now 16 and already showing leadership potential, had started a youth advisory board that gave teenagers a voice in planning their town's future. The responsibility of leadership was distributed among people who'd proven their commitment to Millbrook's welfare over many years and many challenges. Clara arrived home to find Lila waiting on the front porch with homework spread across the old wooden table, where Clara had learned to snap peas and braid hair and believe in the possibility of home. "How was the meeting?" Lila asked, looking up from a math worksheet that seemed too advanced for 4th grade. "Good. Productive. We're going to do some interesting things in the next few years." Clara settled beside her daughter, helping with homework while the sun set over fields and gardens that had sustained 4 generations of their family and would, God willing, sustain many more. The oak tree Elena had planted decades earlier now shaded the porch where Clara planned her days as both mother and mayor, both farmer and community leader, both keeper of traditions and architect of the future. In the distance, the lights of the bakery glowed warm against the twilight. Tomorrow would bring bread to bake, problems to solve, decisions to make about budgets and zoning and the 1,000 small choices that determined whether a community thrived or merely survived. But tonight was for homework and quiet conversation, and the satisfaction of knowing that home was not just a place you inherited, but a place you chose to build, day by day, choice by choice, in partnership with people who'd proven their commitment to something larger than individual success. Tonight was for gratitude to a community that had risen up when family had failed, had offered support without conditions, had chosen investment over exploitation, and courage over comfort. Tonight was for understanding that the best things in life cannot be bought or sold or stolen, only earned through the patient work of showing up, keeping promises, and carrying your share of the weight. If this story resonated with you, give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. Tell me in the comments about your own experiences with community support, family disappointment, or the choice between individual gain and collective good. Share this story with someone who might need to hear about the power of choosing to stay and build, rather than take the easy way out. Because sometimes the most important stories are about ordinary people making extraordinary choices to preserve what matters most, not just for themselves, but for the generations who will inherit the world they leave behind.